This is the Archangel 2210 here to give you a DVD review slash comparison video of the X-Men trilogy. Now, I'm going to try and keep this under 15 minutes. I'm going to talk about each film for about 4 minutes and then talk about all three of them and compare them at the very end. Now, I'm going to try my best to keep it short. Now, we're going to start with, of course, the first X-Men film of the franchise that started this whole phenomenon back in 2001. I believe it was 2000, which was X-Men. Okay. In this film, they had to really almost start from scratch in a way where they had to reintroduce it to a whole new audience. For people that are familiar with it with the cartoon, they would watch it, but they also had to, for people that never heard of the X-Men. So they had to fully describe what a mutant was and where the powers comes from and the differences between the X-Men and the Brotherhood. And I appreciated all that. And I actually liked the different kind of uniforms that they had, which was more of a uniform look instead of a spectacular costume, because for a movie it makes sense for it to be like a uniform because it's at a school and they are students. So it made sense for all of them to wear the same type of costume, but with like it's all black, and then each one had like a different color stripe on it or something. You really couldn't see it though. And the original three in this movie was Jean Grey. She wasn't called Marvel Girl, which I wasn't too upset about because in the modern comics she's not really known as Marvel Girl. Storm, Cyclops, and they had the smaller kids, which was like the new generation, which was like Jubilee, Colossus, Shadowcat. They were all like the students, and the X-Men were the teachers, which was a really great take on it. Because usually the X-Men students is really like just like 5 people, and they're told by Professor Xavier. So in here they really did it where the X-Men are the teachers, and they're more experienced, and all the other kids, and that way it felt like a full school filled with kids. And the overall storyline was basically Magneto. He invented a machine that he thought would turn humans into mutants. So then, of course, he wants to do it to the most public place in New York, Liberty Isle, during some sort of speech. I really can't remember that much, but he does. So of course the X-Men have to stop him from doing this because they found out that when he did it to Senator Kelly, Senator Kelly actually died from it. He turned into water and he just died. So if he did that, they all would become mutants, but after a while their body couldn't take it anymore and they would just die in some way. So they had to stop him from, he could have killed millions of people in New York City. So of course they had to rush to Liberty Isle, with the X-Jet, which was fantastic in their fantastic looking awesome X-Jet. Some people say they didn't like Cyclops. I did feel they kind of put him in the background. It was James Marsden was a good cast, and I really liked the character of Cyclops, but some people felt he was a little stiff. You know, the one thing I didn't like is that they kind of put Wolverine a little too much in the foreground. I guess because he's such a popular character, they just kind of put him up there. Now, they stopped the machine. Of course, Rogue is in it. I forgot to mention Rogue. Oh my goodness. So they really go into the whole psychological depth of Rogue's abilities, that she can't physically touch someone and that she really gets real emotional about it. And they never really explore that fully in a movie before. How she can't touch someone, she can't have a handshake, she can't hug someone, she can't kiss someone, she can't have that physical contact with someone at all, because then she could hurt them or she could kill them, because she did that with her boyfriend in the very beginning of the film. Overall, it was a very good film. It had to introduce the X-Men to a whole new audience, but for the second film, it goes right into the action. And then we're going to talk about the second film. The second film, it was phenomenal. The second film was phenomenal. Had a bigger story, since they got rid of all that story, that all the the talking that they had to do in the first one to explain what's a mutant, what's the X-Men, what's the Brotherhood, who's Magneto. They had to do a lot of exposition in the first film. And this one, it kind of felt like the first big real X-Men film. Usually the second film usually always does if it's done written properly. Like the first one's always like exposition, and the second one is always like the big action film. But this actually is a balance where it's not just all action. It's action, but there's also a really great story. And we get introduced to a few new characters. We get introduced to William Stryker, I believe his name is. And we get introduced to Lady Deathstrike, a version of Lady Deathstrike. And to her and Wolverine fighting, that was really great. You know, the whole adamantium claws against adamantium claws, you know, that was good. My one thing is that I didn't like is that Cyclops really wasn't in this film that much. You know, he had one scene where he was actually fighting, but they didn't really show it. You know, so it was like Cyclops. He's a really cool character. I really like his power. You know, he's really powerful, but they didn't really have him in there. He's the leader of the X-Men. They kind of made him look like a punk. You know, that's like they really downplayed how powerful he is. Now, in this film, I have to talk about it. In this film, throughout the entire film, from the very beginning to the very end, Jean Grey was struggling with powers of, yes, the Phoenix Force. She was feeling that inner struggle. And to verify where Bryan Singer was going with this storyline, there's a line of dialogue in the very beginning where Cyclops says, or Scott Summers says to Jean Grey, "Ever since Liberty Isle, you have not been the same." To explain that the machine that Magneto built that they thought had no effect on mutants is what pushed her powers to the next stage of evolution, pushing her to become the Phoenix. And that's what was happening to her. Her powers were evolving. They were changing. They were manifesting. They were getting more and more powerful. There were times in the film where she had immense amounts of power and she didn't even realize it, and there were times where she had nothing. So she was going through that struggle the entire time. I really love the way he did it. I even love that part where Scott, he's possessed and he's using his optic blast against her and she's holding it back. That just showed how powerful she was. She was actually to hold it back to a certain point. And at one point she actually just forced it back at him and it caused his dam to break. Because both of them are so immensely powerful. But people really downplay Cyclops' power. But he is pretty powerful because he could punch a hole through a mountain. Now, I really like the fact that it was the X-Men and the Brotherhood teaming up in this one. I would have liked the Brotherhood to be more than just Magneto and Mystique. But, you know, like for him to recruit more characters or something. At the end, he did recruit Pyro, who was a member of the X-Men in 1 and 2. But I would have liked to see maybe Scarlet Witch. But we do see a little nod. This was very smart of Bryan Singer. When Mystique is going through the computers, if you pause it for a split second, you see names like Remy LeBeau, who's Gambit, Maximoff 2, which is Peter and Wanda. You see Daniel Moonstone. You see Silver Samurai, all in like the list of people that are captive. So that was really slick and really nice, Bryan Singer. That was fantastic. And I thought if he would have did the third one, he probably would have had those characters in the next film. You know, and that's, you know, that would have been really great if Bryan Singer would have done it. In my opinion, he should have done the third film instead of Superman Returns. On to the third film. Now, I'll be perfectly honest. When I watched it in the movie theaters, I actually was tricked into thinking it was actually a good film. Because I will admit, I did think it was a good film at first. Because of all the action and this, that, whatever. Lots of action. But when I got the DVD and I actually looked at it at home and really dissected it, and compared it to the first two films, it was not nearly as good. First of all, he rewrote the Phoenix. He had it where she always had that power in her. She always had the duality in her. And not till recently, you know, did it really emerge because she died and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But then I was looking at Bryan Singer and what he was doing. It just doesn't mesh. It just looked like, in my opinion, it just looked like Brett Ratner just saw the first film. He fell asleep during the second film when he was watching it, and then he just wrote this script while he was on the toilet. Honestly, it wasn't that great. It just this this all right. Basically, the storyline for this film was Magneto. There's a cure being made, and that was actually a storyline that was done in Astonishing X-Men, and it was also done in the '90s. But I could tell that he took imagery from Astonishing X-Men, Joss Whedon's run in like Volume One. He took like the image of like the glass building and a huge line of people wanting the cure, and I felt like he could have done any other storyline. This is so, it's been done 1,000 times. The cure has been done 1,000 times. Like, okay, no, nothing to the cure, but I. It's like, again, we're gonna focus on Wolverine completely. We're gonna have Wolverine be the main character, and we're gonna kill off Cyclops, who does not die by Phoenix in the comics at all. I understand you want to change things, like Bryan Singer. He changed how Jean was gonna become the Phoenix, and I was cool with that. I really was Brian. I really was cool, and I'm a huge character. I'm a huge fan of that story in the Phoenix. But with the fact that and I didn't even realize this, but when she went back to her home after she killed Cyclops, she went back to her home, and I was thinking, where are her parents? Because she has parents, and she also has a sister. I was thinking, where her family? And then I think, wait a minute, she probably killed them because they weren't there. They would have come home during the middle of that mess if that was happening. I was I was thinking, this is so bogus. And then even explain what happened to her parents. It's just like she came home when they were there. She probably just vanquished them, and then she just went crazy. It was this was not the Phoenix Saga. This was Jean Grey having a mental breakdown. That's what this was. Jean Grey had a mental breakdown. She was depressed. She killed a boyfriend. She killed a professor. She killed a family, and then she killed a whole bunch of other people. This was not the Phoenix Saga. It was a mess. It was Jean Grey having a mental breakdown. Now, I hate the fact that he just kind of mushed the romance between Wolverine and Jean Grey, because it didn't feel natural. Because he was just making references to the first film. It just didn't feel natural. Because because people think, oh, Wolverine and Jean Grey, they like no, Cyclops and Jean Grey, they've been through a whole lot more. Wolverine and Jean is more of a lustful relationship. It's not really a romance. It's just this lustful, playful, cat and mouse type of thing. You know, it's really not an actual relationship. Him and Storm, that would have made more sense, because I think they're actually somewhat a couple, or in the comics. Now, I'm gonna try to talk about comparing them as much as I can, as quickly as I can. The first one was exposition. They had to explain. It was a good film, but there was a lot of exposition they had to go through. They had a lot. They had to talk through a lot of stuff. Now, with the second film, a lot of action, a great story. It was, in my opinion, the second one was the best one out of the entire trilogy. The second one was the most fantastic one out of the entire one. Now, the third one, it was a hot mess. He thought, right, you could tell it was done by a different director, even if even if no one would have said, oh, it's done by a different director, you would have, and if no one said it on the credits or anything, you would have known, because the tone is not the same. He tried, but it's not the same. And he tried, oh, let me do the blue tinted floors and everything, and it's like, you have to get more than just the color scheme. You have to get the tone of the film, the emotion, and it wasn't even long enough. It was even shorter than the first film. In my opinion, the third film, if it's going to be the last film, supposedly, it should be one of the longest ones. I felt it was just kind of cut a little too short. There was not enough going on. It just felt like it was a movie that was rushed together just to get an X-Men movie out. And yeah, it had a big box office, mainly because it had, it was highly anticipated. People wanted to see an X-Men film. It was highly anticipated. So yeah, people went to see this. So, and then not till after I got home, I compared it, and not till after I took the DVD home and actually compared it to the first two films, I was like, this is the third film was terrible. The third film was just terrible. Um, in fact, in my opinion, instead of you watch the first two films, you watch the first two films, and then instead of watching the third film, you get Wolverine and the X-Men, the complete series, because it kind of falls in that same category, falls in that same tone. It almost flows naturally, you know. You just only link you got to do is that Jean Grey comes back to life, and then take it from there. You know, other than that, it almost feels like Wolverine and the X-Men is almost the the third X-Men film that should have been. So I kind of watch that instead of the third film, and that's how I take it. X-Men 1 is probably an 8 out of 10. X-Men 2 is a 9 out of 10. X-Men 3, I'll give it a 4. I'm going to give X-Men 3 a 4 out of 10. I'm being brutally honest. So, the trilogy as a whole, would I say to get the trilogy as a whole? Yeah, just to compare. Just to compare. Well, I've talked too much. I think I'll see you later.